Welcome back to Multiverse of Anime, where we explore the infinite possibilities of our favorite series. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more mind-bending alternate timelines. Picture this, you're watching your favorite coward from Demon Slayer, right? Zenitsu Agatsuma, the guy who literally needs to pass out just to fight demons. But what if I told you there's a timeline where that same terrified blonde becomes something so powerful that even upper moon demons flee in absolute terror? What if the boy who could only access his strength while unconscious awakens something that makes Hashira look like beginners? In the depths of the Infinity Castle, lightning crackles against blood-stained walls. The air itself seems to burn with electrical energy. And there, standing in the center of destruction that defies imagination, is Zenitsu Agatsuma. But this isn't the Zenitsu you know. His hair floats weightlessly around his head, each strand glowing like molten gold. His eyes, once filled with tears of fear, now burn with the calm intensity of divine lightning. The very air around him shimmers with power that makes your skin crawl just thinking about it. At his feet lies what used to be Upper Moon 6, Kaigaku, his former senior disciple, his brother in training, the demon who drove their master to suicide through betrayal. And now, Kaigaku's body is slowly dissolving into ash, his face frozen in an expression of complete and utter disbelief. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Zenitsu isn't unconscious. He's wide awake, and he's crying. Not from fear this time, from something much, much worse. "Gramps," he whispers, his voice carrying the weight of thunder itself. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find my courage. I'm sorry I had to become something inhuman to protect what you taught me was most human." The castle shudders around him, cracks spread through the walls like spiderwebs, each one glowing with residual electrical energy. Other demons throughout the structure are fleeing, their survival instincts screaming that something has fundamentally changed in their world, something that was never supposed to exist. You see, what we're about to witness isn't just another power-up. This is the birth of something that breaks every rule in the Demon Slayer universe. This is what happens when someone so afraid of their own strength finally decides to stop running from it. This is the Thunder God. But wait, it gets crazier. Because in this timeline, Zenitsu's transformation doesn't just affect him. The moment he achieved this divine state, every demon in a 5-mile radius felt it. A primal fear so deep it reaches into their very cores. The fear that something has emerged that can erase them not just from existence, but from the memory of existence itself. And the most terrifying part? He's still learning what he can do. Watch as he raises his hand and lightning doesn't just spark from his fingers, it forms complex patterns in the air, writing commands that reality itself seems compelled to obey. The broken floor beneath him begins to repair itself, not through healing, but through the sheer force of his will reshaping the world around him. But every second of this power is killing him. You can see it in the way his breathing becomes more labored, in the small trickles of blood that evaporate before they can hit the ground. The human body wasn't meant to contain the power of storms. The human soul wasn't meant to channel the fury of the heavens. And yet, here he stands. The question that's going to haunt you for the rest of this story is simple. How did we get here? How did the most cowardly member of the Demon Slayer Corps become something that makes upper moons look like scared children? The answer lies in a single moment, a choice that changed everything, a decision that turned a timeline of familiar victories into something completely unrecognizable. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because what you really need to understand is that this transformation came with a price, and that price is gonna make you question everything you thought you knew about strength, courage, and what it truly means to protect the people you love. You're about to witness the most emotionally devastating fight in Demon Slayer history, a battle between former brothers that will leave you wondering if becoming powerful enough to save everyone is worth losing yourself in the process. You're gonna see techniques that don't exist in the original timeline, powers that rewrite the rules of what humans can achieve, and you're gonna watch as the kindest heart in the entire series makes the most brutal choice imaginable. So buckle up, because the story we're about to tell will change how you see every single Zenitsu scene for the rest of your life. This is the timeline where Thunder itself chose a vessel, and that vessel chose to accept the consequences. The question is, are you ready to see what happens when a coward decides to become a god? Let me take you back to where it all began. Back to the world we knew. The world where Zenitsu Agatsuma was nothing more than a terrified blonde boy who screamed at the sight of his own shadow. In the original timeline, Zenitsu was the Demon Slayer Corps' most unlikely hero, a kid so scared of everything that he literally had to lose consciousness just to access his incredible speed and power. When he was awake, he was useless. When he was asleep, he became lightning incarnate. But here's the thing that made him special. Even unconscious, his body moved with perfect thunder breathing technique, executing the first form thunderclap and flash with devastating precision. Picture him in the entertainment district, completely passed out while slicing through demon after demon. His body moved like poetry in motion, each strike so fast it created after images that confused even upper moon level threats. But the moment he woke up, that power vanished like smoke. He'd returned to being the crying, terrified boy who begged others to protect him. This was Zenitsu's curse and his gift, incredible power locked behind the walls of consciousness. A fighter who could only fight when he wasn't really there. But to understand how drastically everything changed, you need to know about the relationships that shaped him. About Jigoro Kuwajima, the former Thunder Hashira, who became his grandfather figure and master, a man so dedicated to his students that he'd rather die than watch them fail. Jigoro saw something in Zenitsu that no one else could see. While everyone looked at the crying boy and saw weakness, Jigoro saw untapped potential that could shake the heavens themselves. He pushed Zenitsu through training that would break normal people, not because he was cruel, but because he knew what Zenitsu could become. And then there was Kaigaku, Zenitsu's senior disciple. Everything Zenitsu wasn't. Confident, skilled, naturally gifted, and completely conscious of his abilities, Kaigaku mastered 5 of the 6 thunder-breathing forms with ease, while Zenitsu struggled to perfect even one. The resentment between them ran deeper than just rivalry. It was the hatred of someone who had everything looking down on someone who seemed to have nothing. But Jigoro loved them both equally. He saw Kaigaku's natural talent and Zenitsu's hidden potential as 2 sides of the same coin. He believed that together they could revolutionize thunder breathing and carry on his legacy with honor. That belief killed him. When Kaigaku betrayed everything they stood for by accepting Kokushiba's offer to become a demon, it shattered Jigoro's heart completely. The old master performed seppuku rather than live with the shame of having trained a demon. He died believing he had failed as a teacher, never knowing that his other student would one day surpass every Thunder Hashira who came before him. Zenitsu discovered his master's body. The sight of the man who believed in him lying there, dead because of choices beyond Zenitsu's control, changed something fundamental inside him. But in the original timeline, that change only made him more determined to honor his master's memory through traditional means. Now let me tell you about the moment everything diverged. The Infinity Castle mission proceeded exactly as you remember. Muzan's stronghold appeared, swallowing our heroes into its shifting, maze-like interior. The building itself seemed alive, constantly rearranging its rooms and corridors to separate the demon slayers and pick them off one by one. Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu found themselves split up almost immediately. The castle's architecture responded to Muzan's will, creating custom battlegrounds designed to exploit each fighter's weaknesses. For Zenitsu, this meant narrow corridors and tight spaces where his speed advantage would be minimized. But here's where things started to change. As Zenitsu wandered through the shifting passages, something felt different. His enhanced hearing, already supernatural in its sensitivity, began picking up sounds that shouldn't exist. Not just the normal chaos of battle echoing through the castle, but something else. Something that sounded almost like music. It was the song of electricity itself. Every wire in the castle structure hummed with a frequency that resonated in his bones. The very air seemed charged with potential energy, as if a massive storm was building just beyond the walls of reality. And for the first time in his life, Zenitsu could hear it while fully conscious. This had never happened before. His enhanced senses were always active, but the ability to process and understand what he was hearing at this level only came when he was unconscious. Yet here he was, awake and aware, listening to the electrical symphony that surrounded him. The castle seemed to be calling to him. Each turn he took, each corridor he explored, led him deeper into areas where the electrical activity grew stronger. He wasn't just lost in a maze anymore. He was being guided towards something specific. As he moved deeper into the castle, Zenitsu began experiencing flashes of memory that weren't quite his own. Moments of training with Jigoro where the old master spoke about techniques beyond the traditional 6 forms of thunder breathing. Conversations about the true nature of lightning and thunder, and how the breathing style was just humanity's attempt to imitate forces that were fundamentally divine. Thunder breathing is not about copying thunder, he remembered Jigoro saying during one particularly intense training session. It's about understanding that thunder chooses its vessel. The breathing forms are just the invitation. The real power comes when thunder decides you're worthy of carrying its true essence. At the time, Zenitsu had dismissed this as his master's philosophical rambling. Old people said mysterious things all the time, but now, walking through a castle that hummed with electrical energy, those words took on terrifying new meaning. The memories kept coming. Jigoro speaking about a 7th form that existed in theory but had never been successfully performed by any living practitioner. A technique that would require the user to become thunder rather than simply channel it. A form so dangerous that attempting it would either grant divine power or destroy the practitioner completely. The 7th form exists, Jigoro had whispered during their final training session together. But it requires a sacrifice that I pray you'll never have to make. It requires choosing between remaining human and becoming something that can protect humanity. Zenitsu had forgotten this conversation until now. His conscious mind had suppressed it, filing it away with all the other painful memories he preferred not to examine. But the castle's electrical field was awakening more than just his hearing. It was awakening memories and instincts that had been dormant his entire life. As he rounded another corner, the electrical humming suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete it felt oppressive, like the moment before lightning strikes. And in that silence, Zenitsu heard something that made his blood freeze. Laughter, cold, familiar, and filled with contempt. Well, if it isn't the crybaby. Kaigaku stepped out of the shadows ahead, his form now twisted by demonic power but still recognizably the senior disciple who had tormented Zenitsu for years. His eyes glowed with the red intensity of an upper moon demon, and electricity crackled around his claws in a corrupted imitation of thunder breathing. I was hoping I'd run into you, Kaigaku continued, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone Zenitsu remembered from their training days. I want you to see what real power looks like. I want you to understand how pathetic you've always been compared to someone with actual strength. This was the moment, the choice that would change everything. In the original timeline, fear would have overwhelmed Zenitsu here. He would have passed out from terror, allowing his unconscious fighting instincts to take over. The battle would have been fierce, but ultimately predictable, following the established rules of what thunder breathing could accomplish. But something was different now. The electrical energy in the castle, the awakened memories of Jigoro's teachings, and the sight of his former brother, transformed into the very thing their master died to oppose, all combined into a perfect storm of realization. For the first time in his life, Zenitsu Agatsuma made a conscious choice to fight while fully awake, and that choice cracked the foundation of reality itself. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Zenitsu stood facing Kaigaku in the electrically charged chamber, and for the first time in their shared history, he wasn't trembling with fear. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. Kaigaku's demonic form towered over him, crackling with corrupted thunder-breathing techniques that made mockery of everything Jigoro had taught them, his claws extended like lightning rods, drawing power from the castle's electrical systems and twisting it into something dark and wrong. Look at you, Kaigaku sneered, circling Zenitsu like a predator sizing up wounded Wei, still the same pathetic little boy who cried every single day of training. Do you know what our master's last words were about you? He said you were his greatest disappointment, a student so weak he couldn't even stay conscious during a real fight. Each word hit Zenitsu like a physical blow, but instead of breaking him down, they were building something new inside him. The electrical humming in the castle walls seemed to respond to his emotional state, growing stronger with each heartbeat. He died because of you, Kaigaku continued, his voice dripping with venom. If he had focused on training someone with actual talent instead of wasting time on a hopeless case like you, he might still be alive. But no, he threw away his life trying to turn a coward into a warrior. Zenitsu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he could hear Jigoro's real last words, not the cruel fiction Kaigaku was spinning. The old master's voice echoed from their final training session, gentle but urgent. Zenitsu, my boy, the day will come when you'll have to choose between safety and sacrifice. When that moment arrives, remember that true thunder breathing isn't about the forms you can perform. It's about the courage to become the storm itself. When Zenitsu opened his eyes, they were no longer the scared, darting eyes of a frightened child. They held the steady gaze of someone who had found their resolve. You're wrong about Gramps, Zenitsu said quietly, his voice carrying a new quality that made Kaigaku pause mid-stride. And you're wrong about me. The change began slowly. The electrical energy that had been humming through the castle walls started flowing towards Zenitsu instead. Tiny sparks danced between his fingers, and his hair began to lift slightly as static electricity built around him. Kaigaku's confident smirk faltered. What are you doing? You can't use thunder breathing while conscious. You're too weak, too scared. I was scared, Zenitsu admitted, taking a step forward. But not of fighting. I was scared of what I might become if I stopped holding back. I was scared of the power I could feel sleeping inside me every night. The sparks around Zenitsu intensified, forming complex patterns in the air that seemed to pulse with their own intelligence. This wasn't the simple electrical discharge that came with normal thunder breathing. This was something far more profound. Gramps taught me about the seventh form, Zenitsu continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The form that exists beyond human limitations. The technique that requires you to stop imitating thunder and start becoming it. Kaigaku's eyes widened in recognition and fear. That's impossible. The seventh form is theoretical. No one has ever successfully performed it. No one has ever been desperate enough to try, Zenitsu replied. Until now. The transformation began in earnest. Zenitsu's breathing pattern shifted from the rapid, panicked gasps Kaigaku remembered to something deeper and more rhythmic. Each breath seemed to draw electrical energy from the air itself, building power that made the very atmosphere tremble. His hair started changing color, shifting from its natural blonde to a brilliant gold that seemed to generate its own light. The sparks around his body grew larger and more complex, forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kaigaku felt genuine fear for the first time since becoming a demon. Every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to run, to get as far away from this transformation as possible, but pride and disbelief kept him frozen in place. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "You're just a human. Humans don't have this kind of power." Zenitsu's feet began to lift slightly off the ground as the electrical field around him intensified. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that resonated through the castle structure itself. "You're right, humans don't have this power. That's why I'm choosing to stop being human." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kaigaku finally understood what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a power-up or a new technique. This was a fundamental transformation that would change the nature of what Zenitsu was. Terror overrode pride, and Kaigaku launched himself forward with desperate speed. His claws extended to their full length, crackling with his own corrupted thunder-breathing techniques. If he could stop this transformation before it completed, he might still have a chance. Blood Demon Art Thunder Breathing, First Form Crimson Flash. His attack moved faster than the eye could follow, leaving trails of dark lightning in its wake. In the original timeline, this would have been more than enough to overwhelm the conscious Zenitsu, but this wasn't the original timeline anymore. Zenitsu didn't dodge. He didn't even seem to move, but somehow, Kaigaku's claws passed harmlessly through empty air. When Kaigaku spun around in confusion, Zenitsu was standing exactly where he had been, completely unharmed. "How?" Kaigaku gasped. "I'm not moving through space anymore," Zenitsu explained, his voice now carrying the rumble of distant thunder. "I'm moving through the electrical field that connects everything. Watch." Zenitsu raised his hand, and lightning didn't just spark from his palm. It erupted in controlled patterns that seemed to write commands directly into reality. The broken floor beneath them began to repair itself, stones lifting and fitting back together with impossible precision. But the most terrifying part wasn't what the lightning could create, it was what it was doing to Zenitsu himself. His skin had taken on a subtle luminescence, and when he moved, after images of pure electricity followed in his wake. Kaigaku tried another attack, this time using his most powerful technique. Blood Demon Art Thunder Breathing Second Form Five-Fold Lightning Strike. 5 separate attacks materialized simultaneously, each one capable of destroying buildings. They converged on Zenitsu from multiple angles, making evasion impossible. Zenitsu simply exhaled, and the attacks dissolved like mist before reaching him. "The 7th form isn't about fighting," he said, his eyes now glowing with steady golden light. "It's about becoming something that transcends the need to fight. It's about becoming inevitable." Kaigaku staggered backward, his confidence completely shattered. "What have you done to yourself?" "What I should have done the moment Gramps died," Zenitsu replied. "I've stopped running from who I really am." The transformation was nearing completion, but the cost was becoming visible. Small trickles of blood appeared at the corners of Zenitsu's mouth, evaporating before they could fall. His breathing, while controlled, was becoming labored. The human body wasn't designed to contain this level of power. "You're killing yourself," Kaigaku whispered, and for a moment genuine concern broke through his demonic nature. "I know," Zenitsu said simply, "but some things are worth dying for. Gramps taught me that, even if I was too scared to listen at the time." The golden glow around Zenitsu intensified to the point where looking directly at him became painful. When he spoke again and his voice carried the authority of natural forces beyond human comprehension. "Kaigaku, you have a choice. You can keep fighting, and I'll show you what the Thunder God's judgment looks like. Or you can remember who you used to be and die with some dignity intact." Kaigaku's response was predictable. Rage and pride overrode any remaining wisdom, and he gathered every scrap of demonic power he possessed for one final assault. "I'll kill you before your transformation completes." Blood Demon Art Thunder Breathing Ultimate Form Demon King's Lightning. The attack that erupted from Kaigaku dwarfed everything he had used before. Dark lightning filled the entire chamber, crackling with the power of a true upper moon demon. The very air caught fire from the intensity of the electrical discharge. But as the smoke cleared, Zenitsu stood completely unharmed. His transformation had completed during Kaigaku's attack, and what emerged was no longer entirely human. His hair floated around his head like he was underwater, each strand glowing with its own internal light. His eyes had become pools of living lightning, beautiful and terrible to behold. Most shocking of all, his wounds were healing themselves through electrical regeneration, tissue knitting back together as sparks danced across his skin. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of storms themselves. "Thank you, Kaigaku. You helped me understand something important." "What?" Kaigaku gasped, his power spent and his confidence in ruins. "Thunder doesn't destroy because it hates, it destroys because it loves what comes after the storm." Zenitsu raised his sword, and for the first time, electrical energy didn't just enhance the blade, it became the blade, extending its length and sharpening its edge beyond anything physical matter could achieve. The blood that flowed from the corner of his mouth caught fire and disappeared, and his breathing became so labored that each exhale created small whirlwinds of electrical energy. The transformation was indeed killing him, but it had also made him something beyond death's reach. "I'm sorry it came to this," Zenitsu said, and the genuine grief in his voice made even Kaigaku flinch. "But I won't let you dishonor Gramps' memory any longer." As both fighters prepared for their final clash, Zenitsu's body began to change further. The golden glow intensified to the point where it became difficult to tell where his physical form ended, and the electrical energy began. Blood poured more freely from his mouth and nose, but each drop that fell sparked and vanished before hitting the ground. The Thunder God had been born, but the price was Zenitsu's humanity itself. As Kaigaku gathered his strength for one last desperate attack, the question remained, would there be anything left of the kind, scared boy, when this transformation ran its course? The screen faded to black as both fighters prepared for their next clash, with Zenitsu's life hanging in the bounds of his divine transformation, while power beyond human comprehension crackled through the air around them. The darkness lasted only a heartbeat before the chamber exploded with light. Zenitsu's transformation had reached a critical point where his human physiology was actively fighting against the divine energy trying to reshape it. But instead of destroying him, the conflict created something unprecedented, a stable fusion of mortal will and immortal power. Steam rose from his body as his internal temperature regulated itself through electrical discharge. The blood that had been flowing freely from his wounds began to slow, then stop entirely. His breathing, while still labored, found a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse in harmony with the castle's electrical systems. He had become something between human and force of nature, maintaining just enough mortality to remember why he fought while gaining enough divinity to transcend the limitations that had held him back his entire life. Kaigaku stared in horror at what his former training partner had become. The Thunder God stood before him, no longer the crying boy he remembered, but not entirely alien either. Traces of Zenitsu's original personality shone through the divine transformation, making this new being somehow more terrifying than a complete monster would have been. You actually did it, Kaigaku breathed. You completed the seventh form. No, Zenitsu replied, his voice carrying impossible harmonics. I became the seventh form. There's a difference. The distinction became clear as Zenitsu began to move. His first step didn't create the typical burst of speed associated with thunder breathing. Instead, he simply appeared in a different location, as if the space between his starting point and destination had been irrelevant. Kaigaku tried to track the movement and failed completely. One moment Zenitsu was 20 feet away, the next he was directly in front of him, close enough that Kaigaku could see his own reflection in those glowing golden eyes. Thunder God's descent, Zenitsu said quietly. What happened next defied every law of physics the castle operated under. Lightning didn't strike from above or arc between points. Instead, it manifested as a vertical column of pure electrical energy that split the floor beneath them into a chasm that seemed to go down forever. Kaigaku barely managed to leap clear as the attack reshaped the chamber around them. When he landed, he found that the lightning strike had left behind more than just destruction. The edges of the chasm glowed with residual energy that actively repelled his demonic presence, creating zones where he simply couldn't exist. This is impossible, he snarled, launching himself forward with desperate speed. You're still human underneath all that power. Humans have limits. Kaigaku unleashed a flurry of attacks, each one enhanced with his blood demon art to maximize damage and speed. His claws raked through the air fast enough to create sonic booms, and his corrupted thunder-breathing techniques filled the chamber with dark lightning. But Zenitsu didn't defend himself in any traditional sense. He simply existed in the spaces between Kaigaku's attacks, moving through gaps in the assault that seemed too small for anything physical to pass through. Celestial Flash Step, Zenitsu explained as he effortlessly avoided another devastating combination. I'm not moving faster than you can see, I'm moving through the electrical connections that link all matter. From my perspective, your attacks are happening in slow motion. To prove his point, Zenitsu reached out mid-combat and gently touched one of Kaigaku's claws as it passed by. The moment of contact sent a shock through the demon's entire system that wasn't just electrical. It was purifying, burning away layers of corruption that had built up since his transformation. Kaigaku screamed and jerked back, but the damage was done. Where Zenitsu had touched him, his demonic flesh was slowly reverting to its original human state. The change was spreading outward from the contact point like ripples in water. What did you do to me? Kaigaku demanded, watching in horror as his own hand became recognizably human again. I reminded your body what it used to be, Zenitsu said sadly. The Thunder God's power doesn't just destroy demons, it can restore what they once were if there's anything left to restore. Panicking, Kaigaku bit into his own arm, consuming his own flesh to accelerate his demonic regeneration and halt the spreading humanity. The desperate act worked, but it cost him dearly in terms of power and stability. The battle resumed with even greater intensity as both fighters pushed themselves beyond safe limits. Kaigaku, now driven by genuine terror, began using techniques that consumed his life force to fuel greater power. Zenitsu responded by accepting more divine energy into his system, even though each increase brought him closer to losing his human consciousness forever. Their clash sent them crashing through the chamber floor and into the level below. The castle's architecture groaned under forces it was never designed to contain as they battled through room after room, their techniques carving permanent scars into the structure itself. Other demons throughout the castle began fleeing from their vicinity, not because they were ordered to, but because their survival instincts recognized that something had entered their domain that operated on fundamentally different rules than anything they had encountered before. Zenitsu's techniques evolved in real time as his divine nature asserted itself. What started as enhanced versions of traditional thunder-breathing forms became something entirely new. "Divine Echo," he whispered, and suddenly there were 5 identical versions of him moving independently through the battle space. Each copy was made of pure electrical energy but possessed its own tactical intelligence and fighting capability. Kaigaku found himself overwhelmed by opponents who could coordinate their attacks with supernatural precision. Every time he managed to disperse one electrical duplicate, another would appear to take its place. But the most disturbing part wasn't the multiplication of enemies, it was watching the original Zenitsu's face as he fought. There was no anger there, no hatred for what Kaigaku had become, only profound sadness and a determination to end the suffering of someone he had once considered a brother. "Why won't you just hate me?" Kaigaku screamed as he barely escaped another purifying touch. "I killed our master! I betrayed everything he taught us! Why do you look at me like you're the one who's suffering?" Zenitsu paused in his assault, and for a moment, his golden eyes flickered with purely human emotion. "Because I know what you were before you chose this path," he said quietly, "and I know that somewhere inside that demon body, part of the real Kaigaku is still aware of what he's become. This isn't punishment, brother. This is mercy." The words hit Kaigaku harder than any physical attack could have. For just an instant, his demonic features flickered, revealing glimpses of the human face he had worn during their training days. But the moment of vulnerability passed quickly, replaced by renewed rage and desperation. The battle exploded through another floor as Kaigaku unleashed his most powerful blood demon art yet. Thunder-breathing ultimate form, Crimson God's Wrath. Dark lightning filled the entire space, seeking to overwhelm even the Thunder God through sheer volume of destructive force. But Zenitsu's response was something that had never existed before in any timeline. "Thunder God's Sanctuary," he said, and the chaotic electrical energy around them suddenly organized itself into perfect geometric patterns that neutralized Kaigaku's attack while simultaneously creating a space of absolute calm in the center of the storm. Within that sanctuary, both fighters floated in silence for a moment, surrounded by walls of controlled lightning that held back the destruction they had unleashed. "This is what thunder breathing was always meant to become," Zenitsu said, his voice carrying both infinite sadness and unshakable resolve. "Not a technique for destroying enemies, but a way of bringing order to chaos, a method of protecting what matters most, even if it means sacrificing everything else." As the sanctuary dissolved and they fell toward the next level of combat, both fighters understood that their battle had moved beyond personal conflict. They were now fighting to determine the very nature of what power should be used for, and whether strength gained through sacrifice could ever truly be called a victory. The immediate aftermath of Zenitsu's transformation had established new rules for their conflict, but the ultimate question remained unanswered. Would the Thunder God's divine power be enough to save someone who might be beyond salvation? 3 hours had passed since Zenitsu's transformation began, and the effects were spreading far beyond the chamber where he fought Kaigaku. The Infinity Castle, a structure designed to contain and amplify demonic power, was experiencing systematic failure as divine energy coursed through its electrical systems. Throughout the building, demons that had never encountered anything like the Thunder God were discovering that their fundamental understanding of the conflict between their kind and humanity had become obsolete overnight. In the Eastern Wing, a group of lower-ranked demons had been hunting a pair of injured demon slayers when the first wave of electrical disturbance reached them. The demons' natural regeneration abilities began failing as residual divine energy interfered with their cellular structure. What should have been an easy kill became a desperate retreat as their prey suddenly found their weapons crackling with sympathetic electricity. Tanjiro, fighting 3 floors above the main battle, suddenly stopped mid-swing as his enhanced sense of smell was overwhelmed by something completely unprecedented. The familiar scent of Zenitsu, usually tinged with fear and nervousness, had transformed into something that his brain struggled to categorize. "That's not possible," he whispered, his sword trembling in his grip. "Zenitsu smells like light in itself, not like someone using thunder breathing, but like an actual storm given human form." His demon opponent took advantage of his distraction to launch an attack, but the strike never connected. The electrical field emanating from the Thunder God's battle had charged the metal in Tanjiro's sword, and when the demon's claws contacted the blade, the resulting shock sent it flying across the room. Meanwhile, Inosuke was experiencing his own revelation several levels below. His beast-like instincts, finely tuned to detect the hierarchy of predators, were screaming contradictory information at him. Every survival sense he possessed identified Zenitsu's transformed presence as the apex predator in the entire castle, something so far beyond normal power scales that it didn't even register as being the same species. "What the hell happened to Manitsu?" he growled, dispatching a demon with distracted efficiency. "He feels like something that could eat mountains for breakfast." But the most dramatic changes were happening to demons who ventured too close to the central battle, A group of spider demons had been attempting to set an ambush when they stumbled into a corridor where Zenitsu's electrical field had lingered after his passage. The effect was immediate and devastating. Their demonic corruption began burning away like paper in fire, but instead of dying, they found their human memories returning with crystalline clarity. The spider demons remembered their human names, their families, their lives before they had been turned. The psychological trauma of regaining their humanity while trapped in demonic bodies drove most of them completely insane. One of them, a young woman who had been turned decades ago, managed to retain enough sanity to understand what was happening to her. She crawled through the castle halls, her spider legs slowly reverting to human limbs, seeking out the source of the purifying energy that was giving her the first hope she had felt since her transformation. The Thunder God's power was proving to be far more than just enhanced combat ability. It was functioning as a supernatural force that restored the natural order of things, turning demons back toward their original humanity whether they wanted it or not. Kyu encountered one of these partially reverted demons during his own battles and initially prepared to strike it down, but something in the creature's eyes stopped him. Instead of the mindless hunger or calculating malice he expected, he saw human intelligence and desperate hope. "Please," the demon gasped, its voice shifting between inhuman growls and recognizably human speech. "The Lightning Boy, can you take me to him? I can feel my humanity coming back, but I don't know how much time I have before the demon blood reasserts itself." Jiyu found himself facing an ethical dilemma that had never existed before. If Zenitsu's power could truly reverse demonic transformation, did that change the fundamental mission of the Demon Slayer Corps? Were they still justified in killing demons if some of them could be saved? But the most unexpected beneficiary of the ripple effects was someone who shouldn't have been affected at all. Nezuko, safely contained in her protective box several floors away from the main battle, began experiencing changes that defied every rule about her unique condition. The Thunder God's electrical field, spreading through the castle's metal framework, was reaching her despite the distance and barriers. But instead of the purifying agony that other demons experienced, Nezuko felt a warm, comforting energy that seemed to recognize her struggle to maintain her humanity. Her demonic features began to soften. The bamboo muzzle that helped her resist the urge to consume human flesh became unnecessary as that hunger simply faded away. For the first time since her transformation, she felt fully in control of her own mind and body. When Tanjiro finally reached her location, he found his sister sitting calmly outside her box, the bamboo muzzle set aside, looking more human than she had since the night their family was slaughtered. "Brother," she said clearly, her voice carrying none of the usual difficulty with human speech that plagued her demonic state. "Something wonderful is happening in this place. Someone is bringing light to a world that has been dark for too long." The implications were staggering. If the Thunder God's power could not only reverse demonic transformation, but also accelerate the process by which demons like Nezuko could reclaim their humanity, it represented a fundamental shift in the conflict that had raged for over 1,000 years. Meanwhile, the battle between Zenitsu and Kaigaku had moved through multiple levels of the castle, leaving behind a trail of electrical scarring that told the story of their conflict. The patterns burned into the walls weren't random. They formed complex geometric designs that seemed to pulse with their own intelligence, creating a map of divine energy that was slowly converting the entire structure. Other upper moons throughout the castle began to take notice. Akaza paused in his own battle as he felt the presence of something that registered as neither fully human nor demon. His fighting instincts, honed through centuries of combat, identified the Thunder God as a threat that transcended normal categories of power. "What is that?" he muttered, his opponent forgotten as he focused his enhanced senses toward the source of the disturbance. "It feels like someone took human determination and gave it the power to reshape reality." Even Kokushibo, the upper moon one whose power had been instrumental in Kaigaku's transformation, felt the ripples of divine energy reaching his location. For the first time in centuries, he experienced something approaching concern. The techniques being used in the central battle were operating on principles that his extensive knowledge of breathing forms couldn't explain. This wasn't an evolution of thunder breathing. This was something entirely new, a fundamental breakthrough that could change the nature of human potential itself. But perhaps the most significant ripple effect was the one reaching Muzan himself. The Demon King, secure in his private chamber at the castle's heart, felt the Thunder God's presence like a cold wind that seemed to cut through his very essence. For over 1,000 years, Muzan had operated under the assumption that humans were inherently limited creatures who could threaten individual demons through skill and determination, but never challenged the fundamental superiority of demonic power. The Thunder God's emergence shattered that assumption completely. "Impossible," he whispered, his usually perfect composure cracking as he sensed power that felt almost familiar. "That energy signature, it's similar to what I felt from Yoriichi all those centuries ago, but different, stronger in some ways, more dangerous in others." The memory of his encounter with the original sun-breathing master still haunted Muzan's nightmares. Yoriichi had come closer to killing him than anyone before or since, demonstrating that human potential could indeed threaten even the Demon King himself. But what he was sensing now felt even more threatening because it wasn't bound by the same limitations that had ultimately entailed Yoriichi's power. The Thunder God was operating beyond human constraints while maintaining the focused determination that made humanity dangerous in the first place. As the electrical disturbances continued to spread through the castle, affecting every demon and human within its walls, one thing became clear to everyone involved. The emergence of the Thunder God represented either humanity's greatest hope for victory or the beginning of something so fundamentally different that the very concepts of human and demon might become obsolete. The ripple effects had established that Zenitsu's transformation was more than just a personal power-up. It was a catalyst that was forcing evolution in every supernatural being it touched, accelerating the conflict toward a conclusion that no one could predict. The question that haunted everyone who felt the Thunder God's presence was simple. When the dust settled and the true extent of this power became clear, would the world that emerged still be recognizable as the one they had been fighting to protect? The emergence of the Thunder God forced unprecedented changes in alliances throughout the Infinity Castle. Ancient enmities were set aside as both demons and humans grappled with the reality that something had appeared that transcended their traditional categories of friend and enemy. On the 47th floor, a confrontation was building that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Tanjiro had tracked down Zenitsu's electrical signature, following the trail of divine energy through corridors that still hummed with residual power. But when he finally reached the area where his transformed friend was fighting, he found his path blocked by someone unexpected. Jiyu stood in the doorway, his hand resting on his sword hilt, but his posture wasn't aggressive. Instead, the water Hashira looked like someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "You can't go in there," Jiyu said quietly when Tanjiro approached. "Why not? Zenitsu's my friend. If he's in trouble, I need to help him." "Look at your sword," Jiyu replied. Tanjiro glanced down and gasped. His blade was glowing with a faint electrical aura, and the metal was actually warm to the touch. What's happening to it? The energy coming from that room is so intense it's affecting every piece of metal in a 100-foot radius. Jiu explained, if you get too close to whatever Zenitsu has become, your sword might conduct enough electricity to kill you instantly. The conversation was interrupted by a sound that made both demon slayers freeze. Footsteps, but not the chaotic rhythm of combat. Someone was walking calmly toward them through the electrically charged corridors. What emerged from the shadows challenged every assumption they had about the nature of their conflict. It was a demon, clearly recognizable by its inhuman features and glowing eyes, but it was carrying an injured human on its back, moving with obvious care to avoid causing further harm. "Please," the demon said, its voice strained with effort and emotion that shouldn't have been possible for its kind. "The lightning boy, is he the one fighting up there? I need to get this person to him." Tanjiro's hand moved instinctively toward his sword, but Gyu caught his wrist. "Wait, look at its eyes!" The demon's gaze held something that neither Slayer had ever seen before in a creature of its kind, genuine concern for human welfare. More shocking still, the human it carried was conscious and didn't seem to be afraid. "My name was Akira before I was turned," the demon continued. "I've been fighting the hunger for decades, and now something about that boy's power is making it possible to remember who I used to be. This person was injured trying to help others escape from demons like me. I think the lightning might be able to heal him properly." The ethical complexity of the situation left both Slayers struggling for a response. Their entire training had been built around the principle that demons were irredeemably evil and had to be destroyed. But here was clear evidence that Zenitsu's transformation was creating possibilities that their worldview couldn't accommodate. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, an even stranger alliance was forming. Akaza found himself fighting alongside a group of human demon slayers against a pack of lesser demons who had been driven mad by exposure to the Thunder God's electrical field. The temporary partnership had emerged out of pure necessity. The affected demons had become so unpredictable and violent that they posed a threat to everyone in their vicinity, regardless of species. When the humans proved inadequate to handle the threat alone, Akaza had stepped in with devastating efficiency. "Why are you helping us?" One of the Slayers gasped as Akaza's martial arts techniques clear a path through the maddened demons. "Because I want to understand what that electrical anomaly represents," Akaza replied, not breaking his fighting rhythm. "Something has appeared that operates on principles I've never encountered. Until I know whether it's a threat to my own existence, maintaining the status quo serves my interests." But there was more to his motivation than mere self-preservation. The Thunder God's presence had awakened something in Akaza that he thought had been destroyed when he became a demon. Curiosity about human potential. The electrical energy radiating through the castle carried with it traces of pure determination and self-sacrifice that reminded him of qualities he had once admired. The most shocking alliance, however, was forming in the chamber where Zenitsu and Kaigaku continued their battle. As their conflict reached new levels of intensity, both fighters began to realize that their personal confrontation was being overshadowed by something larger. Other demons were converging on their location, drawn by the combination of divine energy and demonic power that their battle was generating. But these weren't reinforcements for Kaigaku. They were predators who saw an opportunity to consume both the Thunder God's power and the Upper Moon's strength. "Looks like we have company," Zenitsu observed as at least a dozen demonic presences surrounded the chamber where they fought. Kaigaku snarled in frustration. "Scavengers! They think they can feast on the remains of our battle." For a moment, the two former training partners found themselves back to back, facing outward toward the circle of approaching threats. The positioning was unconsciously identical to a defensive formation they had practiced countless times under Jigoro's instruction. "Just like old times," Zenitsu said sadly. "Don't get sentimental," Kaigaku snapped, but there was less venom in his voice than before. "This changes nothing between us." "I know," Zenitsu replied, "but Gramps would be proud to see us working together one more time, even if it's the last time." The attacking demons launched themselves forward in a coordinated assault, expecting to overwhelm two fighters who had already exhausted themselves in combat. What they encountered instead was a combination of techniques that neither Zenitsu nor Kaigaku could have achieved alone. Thunder-breathing combination technique Divine Storm. Zenitsu called out, his electrical powers merging with Kaigaku's demonic energy to create something that transcended both sources. The resulting attack filled the chamber with lightning that was simultaneously purifying and destructive, cleaning away corruption while annihilating those who were beyond redemption. The scavenger demons were eliminated so completely that not even ash remained. In the aftermath, the two fighters separated again, returning to their opposing positions. But something fundamental had changed in their dynamic. The moment of cooperation had reminded both of them what they had lost when Kaigaku chose to become a demon. "You felt it too," Zenitsu said. "For just a second, you remembered what it was like to fight alongside someone instead of against them." Kaigaku's response was a wordless snarl, but his attack lacked the desperate fury of before. The brief alliance had forced him to confront the possibility that some part of his human nature might still be salvageable. Throughout the castle, similar scenes were playing out as the Thunder God's influence continued to reshape the fundamental dynamics of the conflict. Demons who had never questioned their nature were experiencing doubt. Humans who had never considered the possibility of redemption for their enemies were forced to reevaluate their assumptions. But perhaps the most significant change was occurring in Nezuko, whose continued evolution under the influence of the divine energy was attracting attention from unexpected sources. Demons who had retained some vestige of their humanity were seeking her out, hoping that her unique condition might offer them a path back to their original nature. A small group of these partially reverted demons had formed a protective circle around her, defending against the fully corrupt demons who saw her as either a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be captured. The sight of demons voluntarily protecting a human challenged every assumption about the nature of their conflict. "Sister," one of them said to Nezuko, his voice still rough with demonic distortion but carrying unmistakable hope. "The lightning that touches this place, it makes us remember. Can you help us understand what we're becoming?" Nezuko, now fully in control of her faculties thanks to the Thunder God's purifying influence, looked at the desperate faces surrounding her with compassion that transcended species boundaries. "The lightning doesn't change what we are," she said gently. "It reveals what we could choose to become, but the choice has to be ours." Her words carried weight because they came from someone who had walked the line between human and demon for years. Together, demons listened with an attention that would have been impossible for their kind under normal circumstances. Meanwhile, the relationship between Tanjiro and Jiyu was evolving as they worked together to manage the humanitarian crisis that the Thunder God's emergence had created. Injured humans needed protection from demons driven mad by electrical exposure, while partially reverted demons required guidance to avoid losing their newfound humanity. This is what the Corps was really meant to do, Tanjiro realized as he helped evacuate civilians through corridors now patrolled by demons who had chosen to protect rather than consume. Not just kill demons, but restore the balance between our kinds. Giyu nodded thoughtfully. "Your friend has accomplished something that centuries of traditional demon slaying never could. He's created the possibility of redemption instead of just revenge." But not everyone was adapting to the new paradigm with acceptance. Some demons, particularly those who had fully embraced their monstrous nature, saw the spreading influence of the Thunder God as an existential threat that had to be eliminated at any cost. A coalition of these unredeemable demons was forming, led by several upper moons who recognized that allowing Zenitsu's transformation to continue unchecked would eventually result in the extinction of demonkind itself. "That human has become something that doesn't belong in the natural order," Hantengu declared to his assembled allies. "He threatens the very concept of what demons are meant to be." "Then we eliminate him before his influence spreads further," Kyoko replied, his artistic sensibilities offended by the crude simplicity of the solution. But even among the demons determined to destroy the Thunder God, there were those who harbored secret doubts. The electrical energy radiating from Zenitsu's battle carried with it traces of the same selfless determination that had once driven them as humans. For some, feeling that familiar emotion again was more terrifying than the prospect of death. The complex web of shifting alliances was further complicated by the arrival of additional Hashira, who had been summoned by the Esserdenden's magical disturbances emanating from the castle. Each one reacted differently to the revelation that one of their junior members had transcended human limitations. Sanemi's response was characteristically direct. "I don't care what he's become, if he's still fighting demons, he's still one of us." Mitsuri was more concerned with the emotional implications. But is he still happy? Power without joy is just another form of suffering. Jome, his stone Hashira, offered the most profound observation. He has chosen to bear a burden that no human should have to carry. The question isn't whether his choice was right, but whether we're worthy of the sacrifice he's making. Their debate was interrupted by a messenger demon, one of the partially reverted ones who had chosen to serve the cause of reconciliation rather than destruction. "The Thunder God requests an audience," the demon announced, its voice carrying formal respect. "He says there are things you need to understand before the final phase of his transformation begins." The implications were ominous. If Zenitsu was still in the process of transforming, then everything they had witnessed so far was just the beginning. The prospect of even greater power being unleashed raised questions about whether the castle, or indeed the surrounding landscape, could survive what was coming. As representatives from both sides made their way toward the chamber where the Thunder God waited, each group carried their own hopes and fears about what they would find. Some expected to encounter a being so transformed by divine power that no trace of humanity remained. Others hoped to find their friend and ally still recognizable beneath the electrical aura that surrounded him. What none of them anticipated was that the final phase of Zenitsu's transformation would require him to make a choice that would determine not just his own fate, but the future relationship between humans and demons for generations to come. The shifting alliances and complex moral landscape that had emerged in response to the Thunder God's presence had created a moment-to-moment opportunity. For the first time in over 1,000 years, there was a real possibility of ending the conflict between their species through means other than mutual annihilation. But realizing that possibility would require everyone involved to abandon their preconceptions about the nature of their enemies and embrace a future that none of them could fully imagine. The summons from the Thunder God created an unprecedented convergence in the Infinity Castle's central chamber. Representatives from every faction that had emerged in response to Zenitsu's transformation gathered in an enormous room that the castle's architecture had spontaneously generated to accommodate them all. The space itself seemed to pulse with electrical energy, its walls lined with patterns of lightning that had frozen mid-strike. The air hummed with tension that was both literal and metaphorical, as beings who had been mortal enemies mere hours ago found themselves standing in the same room. Zenitsu stood at the center of it all, and the sight of him drew gasps from those who had known him before his transformation. He was still recognizably himself, but changed in ways that defied easy description. His golden hair moved as if underwater, each strand carrying its own electrical charge. His eyes held depths of power that seemed to extend far beyond the physical space they occupied. Most unsettling of all was his expression. Gone was the constant fear that had defined his personality. In its place was a calm that spoke of someone who had seen beyond the boundaries of mortal existence and found peace with what he had discovered there. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber's metal framework. "I know this gathering represents choices that many of you never thought you'd have to make." Sanemi stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt more from habit than aggression. "What are you now, Zenitsu? Are you still human enough for us to call you our comrade?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, but Zenitsu's response carried no defensiveness. "I'm what I chose to become when human strength wasn't enough to protect what mattered most," he replied. "Whether that makes me still human or something else entirely is a question I'm still trying to answer." Akaza, who had positioned himself carefully between the human and demon factions, spoke next. "Your power is affecting demons throughout this castle. Some are reverting to their human memories. Others are being driven insane by the contradiction. What is your intention regarding our kind?" "My intention," Zenitsu said slowly, "is to offer everyone in this room the same thing I was offered, a choice." He gestured, and the lightning patterns on the walls began to move, creating a visual narrative that told the story of his transformation. The assembled crowd watched as the electrical energy illustrated his journey from frightened boy to divine being. "I could have remained unconscious forever," he continued, "safe in the knowledge that my power would protect my friends without forcing me to confront what I was becoming. But consciousness means responsibility. It means choosing who to save and who to let go." The demonstration shifted, showing projections of the battles raging throughout the castle. Demons struggling with returning humanity. Humans grappling with the possibility that their enemies might be redeemable. The fundamental assumptions of their conflict being challenged at every level. "The choice I'm offering isn't simple," Zenitsu admitted. "For demons, it means confronting the weight of what you've done while accepting the possibility of redemption. For humans, it means acknowledging that some of your enemies were once people like yourselves." Jume stepped forward, his massive frame somehow managing to convey gentleness despite his intimidating presence. And what choice are you making for yourself, young Thunder God? Zenitsu's expression grew sad, and for a moment, traces of his original personality shone through the divine transformation. I'm choosing to complete what I started, even though it means giving up any chance of returning to who I used to be. The implication sent ripples of unease through the assembled crowd. If Zenitsu was still transforming, if his current state was not the final form of his evolution, then the power he might ultimately wield was beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. Tanjiro pushed through the crowd, his face etched with concern for his friend. Zenitsu, you don't have to sacrifice yourself to save everyone else. We can find another way. Can we? Zenitsu asked gently. Look around this room, Tanjiro. Humans and demons standing together without trying to kill each other. When has that ever happened before? The only reason it's possible now is because something appeared that transcends the categories that have kept you at war for over 1,000 years. He was right, and everyone present knew it. The gathering itself was proof that the Thunder God's emergence had created possibilities that had never existed before. But those possibilities came with a price that was becoming increasingly clear as Zenitsu's transformation progressed. Small cracks were appearing in the air around him, as if reality itself was struggling to contain the forces he was channeling. The final phase of my evolution will require me to become something that exists partially outside this dimension, he explained. I'll be able to maintain a presence here, but my consciousness will extend into realms where the distinction between human and demon becomes meaningless. Kaigaku, who had remained silent throughout the gathering, finally spoke. You're talking about becoming a god in truth, not just in name. Do you understand what that means? It means accepting responsibility for everyone in this room, Zenitsu replied. Human and demon alike. It means choosing to love even those who have made themselves into monsters, because that's the only way to offer them a path back to what they could be. The weight of that responsibility was visible in his bearing. The carefree boy who had once hidden behind unconsciousness was gone forever, replaced by someone who carried the burden of divine judgment with full awareness of its consequences. Nezuko stepped forward, her own transformation allowing her to serve as a bridge between the human and demon factions. Brother Zenitsu, she said, using the familial term that acknowledged their shared struggle with inhuman power. If you complete this transformation, will you still be able to care about individual people? Or will you become so focused on the larger picture that we become just pieces on a board? It was perhaps the most important question that could have been asked, and Zenitsu's answer would determine whether the assembled crowd could trust him with the godlike power he was claiming. Watch, he said simply. He approached one of the partially reverted demons, a young woman whose spider-like features were slowly giving way to human characteristics. Gently, he placed his hand on her forehead, and the electrical energy that flowed between them was warm rather than painful. The demon's transformation accelerated, her monstrous features melting away to reveal a human face marked by years of suffering but alive with returning hope. But more than just her physical form was changing. The electrical energy was restoring memories, personality traits, and emotional connections that her demonic nature had suppressed. My name is Yuki, she whispered, tears streaming down newly human cheeks. I had a little brother. Is he still alive? Has he grown up? Zenitsu's own eyes filled with tears as he absorbed her pain and hope through their electrical connection. I don't know, he admitted, but if he is, and if you choose to seek him out, I'll make sure you have the chance. The demonstration answered Nezuko's question more powerfully than any words could have. Even with godlike power, Zenitsu remained capable of individual compassion. If anything, his transformation had amplified his capacity for empathy rather than diminishing it. But the effort of restoring Yuki's humanity had cost him. More cracks appeared in the air around him. His breathing became more labored. The process of maintaining his existence across multiple dimensional planes was clearly taxing even his enhanced capabilities. How long do you have? Kyu asked quietly. Long enough to finish what needs to be done, Zenitsu replied, but not long enough to how the story ends. That part will be up to all of you. The gathering was interrupted by a violent tremor that shook the entire castle. Through the chamber's transparent walls, they could see explosions of dark energy erupting from the structure's lower levels. Muzan, Akaza said grimly. He's decided that the Thunder God represents too a threat to be allowed to complete his transformation. The final battle was approaching, and everyone in the room understood that the choices they made in the next few hours would determine not just their own fates, but the future of the relationship between humans and demons for generations to come. As they prepared to face the Demon King's assault, the unlikely alliances that had formed around the Thunder God would be tested to their limits. The question was whether the bonds forged in the crucible of Zenitsu's transformation would prove strong enough to withstand the ultimate challenge. The gathering storm was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The castle shuddered as Muzan's presence erupted from its depths like a malevolent earthquake. The Demon King had abandoned all pretense of subtlety, his power manifesting as waves of corruption that sought to contaminate everything they touched. But as his dark energy met the electrical fields generated by the Thunder God's transformation, the collision created phenomena that defied natural law. Where the two forces intersected, reality itself began to warp. Sections of the castle aged centuries in seconds, while others reverted to their original construction. Time flowed in different directions in different rooms, creating pockets where cause and effect operated according to alien principles. "He's not just trying to kill me," Zenitsu observed as he felt Muzan's power probing the edges of his divine aura. "He's trying to corrupt the fundamental forces I'm channeling. If he succeeds, the transformation could turn malevolent." The implications were terrifying. A corrupted Thunder God would possess all of Zenitsu's power with none of his moral restraints. Instead of offering redemption to demons, such a being might choose to dominate both species entirely. Tenjiro drew his sword, the blade immediately beginning to glow with sympathetic electrical energy. "Then we stop him before that happens." "No," Zenitsu said firmly. "This confrontation has to be between Muzan and me. Anyone else who gets too close will be caught in the dimensional distortions our powers are creating." To prove his point, he gestured toward a section of wall where Muzan's corruption was battling his purifying lightning. The affected area was cycling through different states of existence so rapidly that looking at it directly caused physical pain. "But you don't have to face him alone," Nezuko said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had learned to balance human compassion with supernatural power. "Those of us who have been changed by your influence, we can help stabilize the boundary between your energy and his." She was right. The partially reverted demons who had regained their humanity were uniquely suited to serve as buffers between opposing supernatural forces. Their hybrid nature allowed them to channel both demonic corruption and divine purification without being destroyed by either. Yuki, the spider demon whose humanity Zenitsu had restored, volunteered immediately. "You gave me back my name and my memories. Let me help you protect others from losing theirs." Within minutes, a circle of hybrid beings had formed around the chamber's perimeter. They linked hands, creating a living barrier that could contain the worst effects of the coming battle, while allowing those inside to maintain their connection to normal reality. The preparation was completed just as Muzan arrived. The Demon King's entrance was everything his reputation promised and more. He didn't walk through the doorway so much as reality rearranged itself to accommodate his presence. His form shifted constantly, cycling through shapes that ranged from aristocratic gentleman to writhing mass of flesh and teeth. But what made him truly terrifying was his eyes. They held the accumulated weight of over 1,000 years spent perfecting the art of corruption. When his gaze fell on Zenitsu, it carried malice so pure it made the air itself recoil. "So, you're the anomaly that's been disrupting my castle," Muzan said, his voice carrying harmonics that induced despair in anyone who heard them. "A human who thinks he can transcend his limitations through borrowed power." "It's not borrowed," Zenitsu replied calmly. "It's earned. Every volt of electricity flowing through my body was paid for with conscious choice and willing sacrifice." Muzan laughed, the sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming children. "Sacrifice? You have no idea what sacrifice truly means. I have spent centuries perfecting myself, discarding every weakness that made me human. You cling to your mortality like a security blanket." "That's where you're wrong," Zenitsu said, beginning to glow brighter as his power responded to the threat. "My mortality isn't a weakness, it's what gives my power meaning." The first exchange happened so quickly that mortal eyes couldn't follow it. Muzan launched himself forward with speed that bent light around his movement, while Zenitsu responded with his own form of faster-than-light travel through electrical fields. They collided in the center of the chamber with enough force to create a shockwave that would have leveled mountains if not contained by the hybrid barrier surrounding them. The impact sent cascades of energy through both fighters, revealing the true scope of their respective powers. Muzan's strength was devastating but finite, drawn from the accumulated life force of countless victims over the centuries. Zenitsu's power was smaller in total magnitude, but connected to sources that existed outside normal dimensional constraints. "Thunder God's mandates," Zenitsu called out, his technique writing commands directly into the fabric of reality. Golden lightning erupted in complex patterns that sought to impose order on the chaos of Muzan's corruption. But the Demon King's response was equally impressive. "Blood demon art, absolute dominion," he countered, his power manifesting as waves of corruption that sought to rewrite Zenitsu's divine commands with malevolent alternatives. The battle became a contest between competing versions of reality, where Zenitsu's lightning touched, wounds healed, and corruption burgeoned away. Where Muzan's influence spread, decay accelerated, and hope withered. They fought through multiple phases, each one escalating in scope and intensity. The first phase was pure speed and technique. Both fighters moved faster than physics should have allowed, their clash creating temporal distortions that made seconds stretch into minutes from the perspective of observers. Zenitsu's electrical teleportation met Muzan's shape-shifting agility in a display of mobility that defied comprehension. The second phase introduced environmental manipulation. Muzan began corrupting the castle structure itself, turning walls into grasping tentacles and floors into pools of acidic blood. Zenitsu responded by electrifying the building's metal framework, creating a grid of purifying energy that fought back against the spreading corruption. The third phase saw both fighters abandon physical limitations entirely. They began attacking each other's existence on fundamental levels. Muzan tried to erase Zenitsu from history itself, while the Thunder God responded by attempting to purify the Demon King's very concept of being. "You cannot destroy what I have become," Muzan snarled as his form regenerated from injuries that should have been impossible to survive. "I am beyond death, beyond change, beyond the petty limitations that constrain lesser beings." "You're beyond change because you're afraid of it," Zenitsu replied, his own wounds healing through electrical regeneration. "You've spent so long avoiding growth that you've forgotten what it feels like to become something better than what you were." The exchange of philosophical viewpoints was interrupted by Muzan's most devastating attack yet. "Blood demon art, nihilistic consumption," he roared, his power manifesting as a void that sought to devour not just Zenitsu's body but the very concepts that gave his existence meaning. The attack was so fundamentally wrong that it caused the hybrid barrier to crack. Several of the partially reverted demons cried out in pain as the nihilistic energy tried to erase their hard-won humanity. Zenitsu's response was immediate and desperate. "Thunder God's sanctuary, absolute protection," he called out, pouring his divine energy into a barrier that could protect not just the physical forms of those around him, but their essential nature as thinking, feeling beings. The effort cost him dearly. Cracks appeared not just in the air around him but in his own form, as if the strain of protecting so many others was causing his physical existence to fragment. But the technique held, and in the moment of safety it provided, Zenitsu made a realization that changed the entire nature of their conflict. "You're not trying to win," he said to Muzan, understanding flooding his voice. "You're trying to make me choose between my power and my compassion. You think that if you force me to become as ruthless as you are, you'll have won even if you die in the process." Muzan's expression confirmed the accuracy of Zenitsu's insight. A being with your power cannot afford to care about individuals. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose between saving everyone and saving someone. When that moment comes, you'll understand why I discarded my humanity. "You're right that I'll have to choose," Zenitsu admitted, "but you're wrong about what choice I'll make." What happened next redefined everyone's understanding of what the Thunder God's power could accomplish. Instead of gathering his energies for a single devastating attack, Zenitsu began distributing it among everyone in the chamber. Tanjiro felt electrical energy merging with his sun breathing, creating combination techniques that blazed with purifying fire. Jiu discovered that his water breathing could conduct divine lightning to create attacks that could heal even as they destroyed. The partially reverted demons found their humanity stabilizing as Zenitsu's power reinforced their chosen nature. Even Kaigaku, who had been fighting his own internal battle between demonic corruption and returning humanity, felt the Thunder God's energy offering him a path back to redemption. "This is impossible," Muzan sputtered as he found himself facing not one divine opponent but dozens of enhanced fighters whose power was linked through Zenitsu's electrical network. "Individual strength cannot be shared like this." "Individual strength can't," Zenitsu agreed, his form now so bright it was difficult to look at directly. "But love can be shared. Hope can be shared. The determination to protect others can be shared. That's what you never understood, Muzan. Power isn't something you hoard, it's something you give away." The final phase of their battle became a demonstration of competing philosophies made manifest. Muzan's corruption sought isolate and dominate, turning each fighter against the others. Zenitsu's purification created connections and cooperation, allowing individual strengths to combine into something greater than their sum. The outcome was inevitable, but no less dramatic for being predictable. Muzan's 1,000 years of accumulated power proved inadequate against an opponent who had learned to multiply his strength by sharing it. As the Demon King's form began to break apart under the assault of coordinated attacks powered by divine energy, he made one final desperate attempt to achieve victory through corruption. "If I cannot have dominion," he screamed, his voice distorting as his existence became unstable, "then I will ensure that your transformation becomes as monstrous as mine." He poured the last of his power into a curse designed to twist Zenitsu's divine nature into something malevolent. For a moment, the Thunder God's golden aura flickered with dark undertones, and his expression grew cold and distant. But the curse could not take hold. The connection Zenitsu had forged with everyone in the chamber provided him with ants to his humanity that Muzan's influence could not sever. "Thank you," Zenitsu said to Muzan as the Demon King's form finally dissolved completely. "You helped me understand something important. True power isn't about transcending humanity. It's about fulfilling it." The battle was over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. The destruction of Muzan should have marked the end of the conflict, but instead it triggered something far more dangerous. The Demon King's death released over 1,000 years of accumulated corruption into the castle's structure, and that malevolent energy began seeking a new host to contain it. It found one in the most unexpected place. Kaigaku, who had been struggling with his dual nature throughout the battle, suddenly convulsed as Muzan's released power forced itself into his demonic half. But instead of simply corrupting him further, the energy began a transformation that defied every rule about what demons could become. "No," Zenitsu whispered as he watched his former training partner's body begin to change. "The Krupus isn't trying to make him into another Muzan, it's trying to create something worse." The assembled crowd watched in horror as Kaigaku's form expanded and warped, incorporating not just Muzan's power, but the fundamental concept of demonkind itself. He was becoming a living embodiment of everything that demons represented: endless hunger, absolute corruption, and the denial of redemption. "Zenitsu," Kaigaku said, his voice now carrying harmonics that hurt to hear, "you wanted to save me? Then face what I've truly become. Face the demon that your mercy helped create." The creature that had been Kaigaku rose to its full height, easily 20 feet tall and composed of what looked like crystallized darkness. Its eyes held the accumulated malice of every demon that had ever existed, and its presence made the air itself feel contaminated. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't its power or its malevolence. It was the fact that somewhere deep in that monstrous form, traces of the human Kaigaku still existed. His suffering was visible in the creature's expression, a man trapped inside a nightmare of his own making. "You can't save me from this," the corrupted Kaigaku continued, "not without destroying everything I've become. And if you do that, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you chose to murder someone you once called brother." The psychological warfare was more devastating than any physical attack could have been. Zenitsu's entire transformation had been built around the principle of offering redemption rather than destruction, but the creature before him represented a situation where those two options might be mutually exclusive. "There has to be another way," Tanjiro called out, his own enhanced senses allowing him to detect the human soul trapped within the demonic form. "Zenitsu, your power has restored humanity to demons before. Can't you do it again?" "Not like this," Zenitsu admitted, his divine perception revealing the true scope of the problem. "The corruption isn't just covering his humanity, it's feeding on it. Every attempt I make to purify him will give the demonic power more human essence to consume." The corrupted Kaigaku laughed, the sound like breaking crystal mixed with screaming metal. "Finally, you understand. Your compassion has become a weapon turned against itself. The more you try to save me, the more thoroughly I'll be destroyed." But even as he spoke those words, the human part of Kaigaku was fighting against the demonic influence. Replicas of his original personality showed through the monstrous exterior, each one a desperate plea for the mercy he claimed to reject. "Help me," his human voice whispered during one of these moments. "Please, Zenitsu. I don't want to be this thing." The contradiction was tearing the Thunder God apart. His divine nature demanded that he offer redemption to anyone who asked for it. But his practical understanding of the situation showed him that any attempt to save Kaigaku would only make his suffering worse. "Choose," the corrupted Kaigaku demanded, his demonic voice reasserting control. "Save me and doom me, or destroy me and save me. Either way, you lose something you can never get back." It was then that Nezuko stepped forward, her own experience with the balance between human and demon nature giving her insights that others lacked. "Brother Zenitsu," she said, using the familial term that had become her way of addressing him. "What if the choice isn't between saving and destroying? What if there's a third option?" "What do you mean?" Zenitsu asked, though part of him was already beginning to understand. "What if you don't try to separate the human from the demon?" she continued. "What if you help them become something new together?" The idea was radical beyond anything anyone had considered. Instead of fighting the corruption or removing it, Nezuko was suggesting that Zenitsu help Kaigaku integrate both aspects of his nature into something that transcended the traditional categories of human and demon. "That's impossible," the corrupted Kaigaku snarled. "Human and demon nature are incompatible. They destroy each other when forced together." "They destroy each other when one tries to dominate the other," Nezuko corrected. "But what if they chose to cooperate instead?" Zenitsu's eyes widened as he grasped the full implications of what she was proposing. It would require him to use his divine power not to purify or destroy, but to create harmony between opposing forces. "The risk is enormous," he warned. "If I fail, the corruption could spread to everyone here, and even if I succeed, Kaigaku would become something that has never existed before. We don't know what the consequences might be." "I'm willing to take that risk," the human voice of Kaigaku said during another brief moment of clarity. "Please, I'm tired of fighting myself. I want to find peace, even if it means becoming something unprecedented." The decision was made. Zenitsu began gathering his power, but instead of the purifying lightning he had used he focused on creating something entirely new, electrical energy that could facilitate cooperation rather than conflict. Thunder God Synthesis, he called out, his technique manifesting as golden lightning that didn't destroy or purify, but instead created connections between opposing forces. The effect on the corrupted Kaigaku was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the agony that usually accompanied attempts to change his nature, he felt a sense of relief as the warring aspects of his identity finally found a way to coexist. The physical transformation was equally remarkable. The crystallized darkness of his corrupted form began to incorporate veins of golden light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and alien. His size remained imposing, but his presence no longer felt oppressive. When the process completed, what emerged was something that had never existed in over 1,000 years of conflict between humans and demons. Kaigaku had become a being that embodied both aspects of his nature without allowing either to dominate the other. "I remember everything," he said, his voice now carrying perfect harmony between human warmth and demonic power. "The training with cramps, the betrayal, the transformation, all of it. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It's all just part of who I am." The synthesis had created more than just personal healing for Kaigaku. It had established a template for a new kind of existence that could potentially end the conflict between humans and demons entirely. But the effort of creating something so fundamentally new had pushed Zenitsu's transformation to its absolute limit. Cracks were appearing not just in the air around him, but in his physical form itself. The strain of channeling divine power through a mortal body was finally exceeding what even his enhanced physiology could endure. "Zenitsu!" Tanjiro called out in alarm as he saw his friend beginning to fragment. "You're pushing yourself too far." "I know," Zenitsu replied calmly, even as pieces of his form began to dissolve into pure electrical energy. "But this is what I chose, to become something that could bridge the gap between our kinds, even if it meant sacrificing my own existence in the process." The revelation that the Thunder God's ultimate sacrifice would be his own dissolution into the forces he commanded sent waves of grief through everyone present. They had witnessed the birth of something miraculous, but the cost was proving to be higher than anyone had imagined. "There has to be another way," Jiu insisted. "Your transformation has already changed everything. You don't have to destroy yourself to complete it." "I'm not being destroyed," Zenitsu said with a smile that carried all the warmth of his original personality. "I'm being distributed. My consciousness is going to become part of the electrical field that connects all living things. I'll still be here, just in a different form." As his physical form continued to dissolve, Zenitsu's consciousness began to expand throughout the castle and beyond. He could feel the electrical activity in every human brain, the bioelectric fields of every living creature, the vast network of energy that connected all existence. "I can see it all now," he whispered, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "The threads that connect every heart, every dream, every hope. This is what the Thunder God was always meant to become. Not a being of destruction, but a force of connection." The last visible trace of Zenitsu's physical form disappeared in a burst of golden light that spread throughout the castle, healing wounds, mending broken spirits, and leaving behind a sense of peace that transcended understanding. The Thunder God had completed his transformation, not into a being of ultimate power, but into something far more precious, a bridge between all forms of conscious existence, ensuring that no one would ever have to face their struggles truly alone. 6 months had passed since the Thunder God's ascension, and the world had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Infinity Castle, rather than collapsing after Muzan's destruction, had become something unprecedented, a neutral ground where humans and demons could meet without fear of violence. The structure itself had been fundamentally altered by Zenitsu's distributed consciousness. Its walls hummed with benevolent electrical energy that made aggression nearly impossible while promoting understanding and empathy. Visitors often described feeling as though their thoughts were clearer and their hearts lighter simply by being in the building. Tanjiro walked through the main corridor, marveling at sights that would have been unimaginable during the height of the conflict. Human demon slayers worked alongside reformed demons to establish new protocols for managing the transition between species. Children who had been orphaned by demon attacks played games with young demons who were learning to control their hunger through meditation and electrical therapy. The sound of laughter echoed through halls that had once known only screams and the clash of weapons. "It's like he's still here," Tanjiro murmured to himself, feeling the familiar warmth of Zenitsu's presence in the electrical fields that surrounded him, watching over all of us. And in a very real sense, that was exactly what was happening. The Thunder God's consciousness, distributed throughout the global electrical network, maintained a gentle but constant presence that could provide guidance, comfort, and intervention when needed. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. The Demon Slayer Corps had been forced to completely restructure its mission and purpose. Instead of hunting demons for extermination, they now served as mediators and guardians of the integration process. Many senior Slayers had struggled with the philosophical shift, but the undeniable results spoke for themselves. Jiyu stood in what had once been a strategy room, now converted into a counseling center where humans and demons worked through their shared trauma. His role had evolved from Water Hashira to something entirely new, a bridge builder who helped former enemies understand each other's perspectives. The hardest cases are always the ones where both sides have legitimate grievances, he explained to a group of new mediators. A demon who killed someone's family, now seeking redemption. A human who tortured demons, now trying to make amends. Our job isn't to judge who was right or wrong, but to help them find a path forward together. The work was exhausting in ways that combat had never been. Fighting demons required physical courage and tactical skill. Building peace required emotional courage and infinite patience. But the results were worth the effort. Statistics that had once tracked demon attacks and human casualties now measured successful integrations and community healing projects. Former battlegrounds had become collaborative workshops where human technology merged with demonic abilities to create innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Sanemi found himself leading one such project, his aggressive nature channeled into passionate advocacy for victims' rights. His team, composed equally of humans and reformed demons, worked to establish support systems for those who had suffered during the centuries of conflict. I still don't trust most of you, he told a group of demons during one particularly intense planning session. But I trust him. He gestured toward the ceiling, where subtle patterns of golden light indicated the Thunder God's presence. And if he believes you can change, then I'll give you the chance to prove it. The demons in question had been among the most violent of their kind before Zenitsu's influence began spreading. Now they worked tirelessly to make amends, using their enhanced physical abilities to rebuild communities they had once terrorized. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had occurred in the rural areas where the conflict had been most bitter. Farming communities that had lived in constant fear of demon attacks now hosted integration centers where both species learned to coexist. In one such village, an elderly farmer named Hiroshi had become an unlikely symbol of reconciliation. His entire family had been killed by demons decades earlier, leaving him consumed with hatred that burned for years. But when a young demon named Aki arrived at his farm, desperately seeking redemption and a chance to contribute something positive to the world, everything changed. She couldn't bring back my family, Hiroshi explained to visitors who came to study their success story. But she could help me build something that would honor their memory. Together, we've created gardens that feed both humans and demons, proving that cooperation produces more abundance than conflict ever could. Aki, whose demon nature allowed her to work through the night and sense the health of plants in ways humans couldn't, had become the village's most valuable agricultural asset. But more than that, her presence had forced the community to confront their assumptions about the nature of their former enemies. The integration wasn't perfect and challenges remained constant. Some demons struggled with persistent hunger despite their best efforts at reform. Some humans couldn't overcome their trauma enough to trust their former enemies. Regional conflicts still erupted when local leaders failed to maintain the delicate balance that peace required. But each crisis also became an opportunity for the Thunder God's distributed consciousness to intervene. Zenitsu's presence in the electrical networks meant that he could appear wherever he was needed most, manifesting as a gentle voice of reason or a firm reminder of the principles that made coexistence possible. Mitsuri had documented dozens of these interventions during her work as a traveling coordinator. Her natural enthusiasm and empathy made her perfect for the role of encouraging communities that were struggling with the integration process. The most amazing thing, she wrote in one of her reports, is that his guidance always feels perfectly tailored to the specific situation. It's not generic advice or philosophical platitudes. It's exactly what that particular person or community needs to hear at that moment. The personalized nature of the Thunder God's interventions reflected his fundamental understanding that lasting peace couldn't be imposed from above. It had to grow organically from the choices made by individuals who decided to trust each other despite their history. Nezuko had become living proof of what such choices could accomplish. Her unique position as someone who had successfully integrated human and demon nature made her a powerful advocate for the New World Order. She traveled constantly, sharing her story and providing hope to others who struggled with dual natures. The Thunder God didn't save us by defeating our enemies, she would tell audiences composed of mixed human and demon crowds. He saved us by showing us that our enemies could become our friends and that our greatest strengths come from choosing cooperation over conflict. But the most significant changes were occurring among the younger generation. Children who had grown up during the transition period showed levels of integration that amazed their elders. Human and demon children played together naturally, their friendships unmarked by the prejudices that had defined previous generations. In the schools that had been established throughout the former conflict zones, students learned history that included perspectives from both sides of the war. They studied techniques that combined human innovation with demonic abilities. Most importantly, they learned to see diversity of nature as a strength rather than a threat. Kaigaku had become one of the most effective teachers in these integrated schools. His unique existence as a being who embodied both human and demon nature made him uniquely qualified to help students navigate their own complex identities. The hardest lesson I had to learn, he would tell his classes, was that you don't have to choose between different parts of yourself. You can choose to let them work together instead. His students, both human and demon, responded to his authenticity in ways that surprised everyone. They could sense that he had genuinely struggled with the same conflicts they faced, and his hard-won wisdom carried weight that no theoretical teaching could match. The success of the integration program had attracted attention from beyond Japan's borders. Delegations from other countries began abroad to study the methods that had transformed centuries of conflict into unprecedented cooperation. But they discovered that the techniques couldn't simply be exported. The Thunder God's consciousness was specifically attuned to the electrical networks in his immediate area of influence. Other regions would need to find their own paths to peace, though they could certainly learn from the principles that had proven effective. The realization that lasting peace required local solutions rather than universal formulas had actually strengthened the New World Order. Communities took ownership of their integration processes, developing approaches that reflected their specific cultures and challenges. As the first anniversary of the Thunder God's ascension approached, planning began for a celebration that would demonstrate how far they had all come. The festival would be held in the transformed Infinity Castle, bringing together representatives from every community that had embraced the new paradigm. But even as they planned their celebration, everyone understood that their work was far from complete. Building a lasting peace between species that had been at war for over 1,000 years would require constant effort and vigilance. The difference was that now they believed it was possible. The Thunder God's sacrifice had given them more than just the tools for coexistence. It had given them proof that love could triumph over hatred, and that redemption was always possible for those willing to choose it. The New World Order wasn't perfect, but it was filled with hope in ways the old world had never been, and in the gentle hum of electrical energy that pervaded their daily lives, they could feel the constant presence of someone who had chosen to become something greater than human, so that both humans and demons could become something better than they had ever been before. As the first year of the new era drew to a close, thoughtful individuals from both species found themselves grappling with questions that had no easy answers. The transformation of their world had been so complete that it challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence itself. Yomei, the former stone Hashira, spent his days in meditation at a mountaintop shrine that had become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking deeper understanding. His enhanced spiritual perception allowed him to sense the Thunder God's distributed consciousness more clearly than most, and their conversations had become legendary among those seeking wisdom. The question that troubles me most, Gyomei confided during one such session, is whether we truly chose this peace, or whether Zenitsu's influence made the choice for us. Are we acting from genuine transformation, or are we simply responding to divine manipulation? The answer came not as words, but as a gentle warmth in the electrical field around him, followed by a subtle shift in his own thoughts. But the shift didn't provide easy answers. Instead, it offered deeper questions and the wisdom to appreciate their complexity. I understand, Gyomei said after a long moment of contemplation. Free will isn't about making choices without influence. It's about making choices despite influence, or even because of good influence. The Thunder God doesn't force us to be better. He makes it easier for us to choose to be better. This distinction had become central to the philosophical framework that scholars were developing to understand their transformed world. The Thunder God's power didn't override individual agency. Instead, it removed barriers that had previously made cooperation difficult or impossible. Tanjiro had experienced this firsthand during his work as a mediator. In the early days of integration, his enhanced empathy had sometimes felt overwhelming. He could sense the pain and fear on both sides of every conflict, making it difficult to maintain the emotional distance necessary for effective mediation. But Zenitsu's presence in the electrical fields around him had provided subtle support that helped him process these intense emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The assistance was so gentle that it felt like his own growth rather than external intervention. It's like having a friend who always knows exactly what to say, Tanjiro explained to either of other mediators. Not someone who tells you what to think, but someone who helps you think more clearly about what you already believe. This quality of the Thunder God's influence had proven crucial to the integration's success, because his guidance felt like personal insight rather than external commands. People maintained their sense of agency while receiving the support they needed to make difficult choices. Inosuke, never one for subtle philosophical distinctions, had put it more bluntly. Monetsu's not telling us what to do, he's just making it so we can actually do what we want to do instead of what we're scared of doing. His crude but accurate assessment highlighted another important aspect of the New World Order. The Thunder God's influence primarily worked by reducing fear rather than increasing any particular emotion. People weren't compelled to love their former enemies. They were simply freed from the terror that had made such love impossible. Kaigaku had become something of an expert on this phenomenon, having experienced the most dramatic transformation of anyone involved. His unique perspective as someone who existed in perfect balance between human and demon nature gave him insights that pure humans or pure demons couldn't achieve. The beautiful thing about what Zenitsu became, he told a group of students studying the integration process, is that he doesn't judge the choices we make. He just makes sure we have the emotional space to make real choices instead of choices driven by panic or hatred. This non-judgmental quality had proven essential to maintaining trust in the new system. Former enemies could work together because they didn't feel condemned for their past actions, while simultaneously feeling supported in their efforts to choose differently going forward. But perhaps the most profound philosophical question raised by the Thunder God's transformation concerned the nature of sacrifice itself. Traditional heroic narratives focused on warriors who gave their lives to defeat enemies. Zenitsu had given his individual existence to transform enemies into allies. Nezuko had spent considerable time contemplating this distinction during her travels. Her own experience of maintaining humanity while possessing demonic power gave her unique insights into the kind of sacrifice Zenitsu had made. Most heroes sacrifice themselves to protect what they love, she observed during a speech at one of the integration centers. But some heroes sacrifice themselves to expand what they love. Brother Zenitsu didn't just protect humans from demons, he expanded his definition of who deserved protection until it included everyone. This expansion of moral consideration had become one of the defining characteristics of the new era. The categories of us and them that had defined the conflict for centuries had been replaced by a more inclusive understanding of community that transcended species boundaries. The practical implications were visible everywhere. Medical centers treated human and demon patients with equal care. Economic systems had evolved to accommodate the different needs and abilities of both species. Legal frameworks had been established that recognized the rights and responsibilities of beings whose nature didn't fit traditional human categories. But the deeper transformation was in how people thought about the relationship between individual identity and collective responsibility. The Thunder God's distributed consciousness demonstrated that it was possible to maintain personal identity while being part of something larger. We learned that true strength doesn't come from standing alone, Gyu reflected during a conversation with fellow Forer Hashira. It comes from standing together in ways that make everyone stronger without diminishing anyone's individuality. This understanding had become the philosophical foundation of their new society. Instead of viewing cooperation as a loss of independence, they had learned to see it as a multiplication of possibility. The Thunder God's sacrifice had illuminated a truth that transcended the specific circumstances of their conflict, that the highest form of love was not possession or protection, but the willingness to transform oneself so that others could become the best versions of themselves. As they prepared for their anniversary celebration, the people of this transformed world carried with them the knowledge that they had witnessed something unprecedented in the history of their species. They had seen what happened when someone chose to love without limits, and they had discovered that such love could literally reshape reality. The philosophical implications would continue to unfold for generations, but the practical result was already clear. They had learned to build a world where redemption was always possible, where former enemies could become family, and where the electric presence of a friend who had chosen to become something greater than human ensured that no one ever had to face their darkest moments alone. As the anniversary celebration approached, scholars and mystics throughout the transformed world began noticing patterns that had been hidden beneath the surface of their remarkable transformation. The Thunder God's influence had spread far beyond the immediate effects of his sacrifice, creating connections that challenged their understanding of how change truly occurs. In the archives of the former Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, researchers discovered that Zenitsu's transformation had been subtly foreshadowed throughout his entire journey. Training records showed that his unconscious fighting abilities had always involved techniques that shouldn't have been possible within the normal parameters of thunder breathing. He was already beginning to transcend human limitations, noted one scholar studying these documents. The transformation wasn't a sudden change, it was the culmination of a process that had been building his entire life. More intriguingly, similar patterns were beginning to emerge in other breathing techniques. Young practitioners of water breathing reported dreams of vast oceans that spoke with familiar voices. Students of wind breathing described moments when they felt connected to air currents around the entire planet. The implications were staggering. If Zenitsu's evolution was part of a larger pattern rather than a unique occurrence, it suggested that other practitioners might be capable of similar transformations under the right circumstances. But perhaps the most mysterious discovery came from examining the electrical patterns that the Thunder God's consciousness had woven throughout the global network. Hidden within the seemingly random fluctuations of power grids and communication systems was something that resembled a vast, complex message. Cryptographers who had once served the Demon Slayer Corps worked alongside reformed demons whose enhanced senses could detect patterns invisible to human perception. Together, they began to decode what appeared to be instructions or perhaps predictions about future developments. "It's not telling us what will happen," explained one of the lead researchers. "It's more like a map of possibilities, as if he's showing us all the different paths our world could take depending on the choices we make." The discovery added new depth to their understanding of the Thunder God's sacrifice. He hadn't just transformed their present, he had created a framework for navigating their future, a subtle guidance system that could help them avoid the mistakes that had led to centuries of conflict. Tanjiro experienced this guidance personally during a particularly difficult mediation case. A community was struggling with integration issues that seemed impossible to resolve, with both humans and demons becoming increasingly frustrated despite their best efforts. As he sat in meditation, seeking insight into how to help them, he felt a familiar warmth in the electrical field around him. But instead of providing answers, the presence seemed to be highlighting questions he hadn't thought to ask. Following this subtle guidance, he discovered that the community's problems weren't actually about human-demon relations. They were about economic inequality that had existed long before the integration began. The species conflict had simply provided a convenient scapegoat for deeper issues. He's still teaching us, Tanjiro realized, not just about how to get along with former enemies, but about how to see the real problems underneath the obvious ones. This quality of the Thunder God's continued presence became increasingly apparent to those who worked closely with integration issues. His consciousness seemed to possess an almost infinite capacity for understanding the complex interconnections between different problems and their solutions. Nezuko, during her travels, began to notice that communities which had successfully integrated often reported strange coincidences that had helped them through their most difficult periods. Critical supplies arriving just when they were needed most. Key individuals meeting at exactly the right moment to forge important friendships. Technical problems resolving themselves in ways that brought people together rather than driving them apart. It's like he's weaving a story, she observed, not forcing events to happen, but arranging circumstances so that people have the best possible chance to make good choices. The realization that they were living within a narrative shaped by the Thunder God's distributed consciousness added new meaning to their daily lives. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of cooperation or conflict was part of a larger story about what their species could become together. But the most profound hidden thread was discovered by children who had grown up during the integration period. Their natural acceptance of the mixed human-demon world had developed in ways that surprised their elders. Some of these children displayed abilities that seemed to draw from both human and demon nature without being either. They could sense electrical fields like Zenitsu had, but they were clearly still human. They possessed enhanced physical abilities reminiscent of demons, but without the accompanying hunger or aggression. There's something new, Kaigaku observed while teaching one such group. Not human, not demon, but not a mixture of both either. They're what we might all become if this transformation continues. The implications were breathtaking. The Thunder God sacrifice might have initiated an evolutionary process that would eventually transcend the categories of human and demon entirely, creating new forms of conscious existence that incorporated the best qualities of both while being limited by neither. As the anniversary celebration began, the people gathered to honor their transformed world carried with them the knowledge that they were part of something far larger than they had initially realized. The Thunder God's influence wasn't just healing the wounds of their past conflict, it was actively guiding the evolution of their species toward possibilities that no one had imagined. The story they thought they were living about reconciliation between ancient enemies was revealing itself to be the opening chapter of a much larger narrative about the conscious evolution of life itself. And in the gentle electric hum that surrounded their celebration, they could feel the presence of someone who had loved them enough to become the bridge between what they had been and what they were still becoming. The most mind-blowing revelation came in the final moment of their celebration, when the electrical patterns throughout the feasible grounds suddenly synchronized to spell out a message visible only to those with enhanced perception. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your choice to write a better one. The Thunder God had not just saved their world, he had given them the tools and the wisdom to continue saving it, one conscious choice at a time, for as long as love remained stronger than fear.